The building was already awake before the sun came up. Long white lights hummed softly above clean floors, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with old coffee drifted through the halls. This place was used to order, to rules, to people who walked with purpose. It did not notice the janitor most mornings, and that was exactly how he preferred it. He pushed his cart slowly, careful not to make noise. The wheels had a small squeak, so he always guided them gently. He had learned long ago that quiet work drew less attention. His uniform was plain, worn but clean. His boots were old, yet polished. He kept his back straight as he moved, not from pride, but from habit. Some habits never leave you. He worked nights and early mornings because it fit his life. During the day, he was a father. He made breakfast, packed lunches, checked homework, and walked his child to the bus stop before coming here. Most people in the building never asked about that part of his life. They only saw a janitor, and that made things simpler. As he finished wiping down a glass wall near a secured office wing, footsteps echoed behind him. They were sharp, fast, confident. He knew that sound. He stepped slightly to the side, giving space, as he always did. Respect mattered, even when no one noticed. "Hey, you, stop." The voice was firm, edged with authority. He turned slowly, keeping his hands visible. A man in a pressed uniform stood a few feet away. His posture was rigid, his eyes alert. The insignia on his chest marked him as a captain. The janitor lowered his gaze slightly, not out of fear, but courtesy. "Yes, sir?" He said calmly, "What are you doing in this section?" The captain asked, looking at the cart, then back at the man's face. "Cleaning, sir," the janitor replied. "I'm scheduled for this wing." The captain frowned. "This is a restricted area. Civilian staff don't come through here without escort." The janitor nodded. "I understand, sir. I have clearance." That single sentence changed the air between them. The captain's expression hardened. "No, you don't." "I do," the janitor said quietly. The captain stepped closer. "Don't lie to me. I've been stationed here long enough to know who belongs where." The janitor did not argue. He reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a worn badge card. It wasn't new or shiny. It had been reissued many times. He held it out without a word. The captain barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "This doesn't mean what you think it means." "It means I'm allowed to be here," the janitor said. The captain let out a short laugh, not amused. "You janitors are getting bold these days. Making up stories. Acting important." A few officers nearby slowed their steps. One stopped near a doorway. Another pretended to check a tablet while listening closely. The janitor felt their eyes, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not acting, sir." The captain folded his arms. "Then explain why I've never seen you before." "I work nights," the janitor said, "and early mornings." "That's convenient," the captain replied. "So you just happen to have special access no one knows about?" The janitor hesitated, not because he lacked an answer, but because he knew where answers led. Attention had a cost. He had paid it before. "My access was approved years ago," he said finally. "It hasn't changed." The captain shook his head. "You expect me to believe that? You expect me to believe a janitor has clearance in this wing?" The janitor met his eyes now. There was no challenge in his look. Just truth. "I don't expect anything, sir." That calm response only made the captain more irritated. "You're lying," he said loudly enough for others to hear. "And you're not very good at it." One of the officers nearby shifted uncomfortably. Another glanced at the badge again, curious. The janitor took a breath. He had been called worse before. Names didn't stick when you knew who you were. "Sir," he said, "I'm just doing my job." The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your job is to clean floors, not wander where you don't belong." The janitor nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. And this is where I belong." Silence fell between them. The hum of the lights seemed louder now. The captain straightened. "Security," he said into his radio. "I have a civilian in a restricted area claiming clearance." The janitor did not move. He did not protest. He simply stood there, hands resting lightly on the handle of his cart. "You should have just told the truth," the captain said. "Now you've made things harder for yourself." "I did tell the truth," the janitor replied. The captain snorted. "We'll see." While they waited, the captain paced slightly, glancing at the janitor as if trying to catch a crack in his calm. "What's your name?" he asked. "I'd rather not say, sir," the janitor answered. "That's not how this works," the captain said sharply. The janitor looked at him. "With respect, sir, my name won't change the situation." The captain shook his head in disbelief. "Unbelievable. You really think you're above the rules?" "No, sir," the janitor said. "I believe in them." That response caught the captain off guard, just for a moment. He recovered quickly. "Then you won't mind facing the consequences." Footsteps approached. A security officer came into view, tablet in hand. The captain gestured toward the janitor. "This man is trespassing." The security officer looked at the janitor, then at the badge. He frowned slightly. "This ID is still active." The captain snapped his head toward him. "Active doesn't mean valid." "It does mean something," the officer replied carefully. The janitor remained silent. The captain crossed his arms again. "Run it again. Dig deeper." The security officer nodded and stepped aside. As minutes passed, whispers grew. People wondered who this quiet man was. He didn't look nervous. He didn't beg. He didn't explain more than needed. That unsettled some of them. The janitor thought of his child waiting for him at home later that morning. He thought of breakfast plans, of a promise to help with the school project. He hoped this wouldn't delay him too much. The captain leaned closer. "Last chance," he said. "Admit you lied." The janitor looked at him, eyes steady. "I won't lie to make things easier." The captain stared, then laughed again, louder this time. "You're something else." The security officer returned, his expression different now. "Sir," he said quietly, "there's a note on the file. It says clearance was granted under special circumstances. Joint Command approval." The captain stiffened. "That doesn't make sense." "It's old," the officer added. "Very old." The captain looked back at the janitor, suspicion deepening instead of fading. "Who approved it?" The janitor answered simply, "People who aren't here anymore." The captain's jaw tightened. "So now you're being mysterious." "I'm being honest," the janitor said. The captain turned away, frustrated. "This isn't over," he muttered. The janitor knew that. He had known it the moment the first question was asked. Some truths stayed quiet only until someone decided to challenge them. Down the hall, an elevator chimed softly. No one noticed yet, but something was already changing, and the janitor kept standing there, calm, patient, waiting just as he always had. The janitor's eyes followed the captain as he walked away to speak into his radio. His chest felt tight, but he stayed still, steady. He had been in situations like this before, though never quite like this. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, even though the morning air was cool. Years of discipline had taught him how to stay calm, how to breathe through tension, and how to wait. He leaned slightly on his cart and looked around the hall. It was quiet again, except for the distant hum of lights and the faint squeak of a boot on tile somewhere far away. Most people in this building didn't even know he existed. They saw a janitor, a man who moved quietly and cleaned efficiently. They didn't know about the life he had lived, the choices he had made, or the battles he had fought, both on and off the field. He remembered his early years in service. He had joined young, like so many did, thinking it was a duty, a calling. Every day had been a challenge, every mission a test of endurance and courage. He had learned to trust only a few people, to move with precision, and to respect the chain of command without question. Those lessons had stayed with him long after he had walked away from uniformed service. After leaving active duty, he had tried to live quietly. Jobs came and went. Opportunities arose, but he had always said no when they would endanger the life he had built outside the military, the life with his child. He worked hard, sometimes 2 or 3 jobs, to make ends meet. He learned to clean fast, to plan ahead, to get the most done with the least fuss. His child's laughter, the small victories at school, the simple dinners together, those were more important than any recognition or medal. The sound of the captain's voice cut through the hallway again. I want full records. Every clearance, every file. I don't care how old it is. Find him out. The janitor stayed calm. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He had seen men like this before, men who thrived on authority and who hated being wrong. They made threats and raised voices, but their power often only existed on paper, in badges, and in rank. Truth had a way of moving quietly around arrogance, and he had learned how to let it do its work. He remembered the first day he had come back to this building as a janitor. He had walked in, cleaned the floors, and kept his eyes down. No one had cared much. No one had questioned him. It had been perfect. But then, something had changed in the world. New commanders, new rules, new officers with new egos had arrived. They didn't know the history, and they didn't care to learn. They only saw a man in plain clothes, a man who didn't fit their expectations. He leaned slightly on the mop, thinking about the years that had brought him here. He remembered a mission overseas where things had gone wrong. A village caught in the middle of conflict, families trapped under rubble. He had gone in with his team, risking everything to pull people out, to save lives. Not for medals, not for recognition, but because someone had to. Because it was the right thing to do. The memory was sharp, like it had happened yesterday. The heat, the dust, the cries of children and parents, it never left him. Even when he had left service, even when he worked long nights cleaning floors, those memories reminded him of who he was, of what he had done. They gave him strength, and they gave him patience. He heard the captain's voice again, louder this time. Bring him to my office now. The janitor did not move. He waited. He knew the officers approaching were confused. They had seen the badge. They had checked the files. And yet, the captain refused to believe. It was human nature, he realized. Some people could not accept things that didn't fit neatly into their understanding. He thought of his child, waiting at home for breakfast. He thought of the small notes tucked in lunchboxes, of the stories shared after school. Those were the rewards he cherished most. A medal or recognition could never replace those moments. He wanted to return home on time, to share a laugh, to help with homework, and to make pancakes just right. The officers arrived and stood a few feet away. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. They didn't know whether to trust their superior or the quiet man in front of them. One of them muttered, "His file is real. It says he's cleared." The captain snapped his head toward the officer. That means nothing. Paper doesn't prove anything. He could have faked it. The janitor remained calm. He remembered the first time someone had questioned him like this in his life. During training, someone had accused him of exaggerating a report. He had stayed silent. Later, the truth came out. Those who had lied were caught. Those who had told the truth quietly were vindicated. Patience and discipline had always been his allies. The officer swallowed hard. Sir, it's verified. His name, clearance, everything. It's old, but it's valid. The captain shook his head. Then call someone higher. Call the command. The janitor didn't react. He knew this was coming. Rules required it. Protocol required it. People with rank often demanded proof before accepting reality. He had learned not to take it personally. He thought back to another memory, his child's first day at school after his return from service. The child had run to him with wide eyes, hugging him so tightly that he almost fell. It had been a reminder that everything he had done, every secret, every mission, every risk he had taken, had been for moments like this. They had been worth every hardship. The officers spoke quietly among themselves now, their words full of doubt and amazement. The janitor could hear fragments. I can't believe it. All these years? How did he even get clearance? He smiled faintly, not with pride, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who knows the truth. Truth has a way of surviving, he thought. It does not need loud voices or threats. It only needs patience. The captain finally turned to him again. This isn't over, he said. His voice was lower, edged with frustration. You will come with me. You will explain everything. The janitor nodded. Yes, sir, he said simply. As they walked down the hall, the janitor's mind wandered to the ordinary tasks he had waiting at home. A child's homework, breakfast, and small household chores. He had chosen this life deliberately, leaving behind the noise, the recognition, and the danger. And now, even in the face of doubt and accusations, he held to that choice. He would not let anyone take it away. The captain led him to a small office. Papers were scattered across the desk. The air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The captain gestured for him to stand in front of the desk. Start talking, he said. The janitor stayed calm. He thought carefully before speaking. Every word mattered. Every reaction mattered. Sir, he said, I have told the truth. My clearance is valid. I am authorized to be here. I only wish to do my job. The captain frowned. Why are you hiding it then? Why do you not introduce yourself? Why do you not make people know who you are? The janitor shook his head slightly. I have nothing to prove to anyone. My work, my responsibilities, and my family are enough. Recognition is not my goal. The captain's eyes narrowed. That is not the way people operate. Everyone wants recognition. Everyone wants approval. The janitor's voice remained steady. Not everyone, sir. Some of us only want to live honestly, to do what is right without fanfare. The captain leaned back, frustration clear on his face. He picked up a paper and looked at it, shaking his head. Your file says you were involved in something classified, something significant. Why leave service and end up here? The janitor paused. He thought of the risks, of the dangers, of the lives that could have been affected by attention. Because my family comes first. Because some things are not meant for the public. Because I made a choice. The captain stared at him, unable to understand, yet sensing the weight of truth. The janitor's calm, his steady presence, and his refusal to exaggerate or argue, began to shift the energy in the room. The officers outside the door whispered, noticing the change. The janitor's gaze remained quiet, steady. He did not demand respect. He did not beg for it. It was clear, however, that respect would come in time. As truth always finds its way, the captain exhaled slowly, frustration and doubt mixed together. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. The janitor nodded slightly. Sir, sometimes the world does not make sense until you see it from another perspective. The captain shook his head, looking down at the paper again. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then leaned back. He didn't speak for a long moment, unsure of how to proceed. The janitor's mind, however, was already moving forward. He thought about his child, about breakfast, about the simple life waiting for him outside these walls. Patience had carried him this far, and it would carry him further. Outside, the hallway was quiet again. Footsteps came and went. People whispered. But inside the small office, the janitor stood, calm and composed. He did not need to prove anything. The truth, eventually, would prove itself. And for the first time that morning, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The office was quiet now, but the air was thick with tension. The janitor stood still, his hands resting lightly on the mop cart he had brought in, as if it was a shield and a reminder of why he was there. Outside the door, footsteps echoed along the corridor, officers moving between rooms, whispers exchanged in low voices. He could hear the tension building even without looking. The captain sat behind his desk, eyes sharp, scanning the old paper files again and again. He shook his head as if repeating the motions could make the situation fit into the neat world he understood. "I don't understand why this is happening," he muttered, mostly to himself. Everything says he's lying, yet nothing can prove it. The janitor did not speak. He had learned long ago that words alone rarely solved problems. Actions, calmness, and patience often spoke louder than any explanation. He thought about how many times in his life he had been accused, underestimated, and dismissed. Every time staying quiet and letting truth guide the way had carried him through. He reminded himself that this would be no different. "You realize," the captain said suddenly, looking up, "that if someone checks more deeply, they'll find holes. They always do. There is no such thing as perfect documentation." The janitor shook his head slightly. "Sir, all necessary documentation exists. It may be old, but it is accurate. I have done nothing wrong." The captain leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Yet you've kept this hidden. How do I know you aren't fabricating a story? A clever plan to make people respect you, or to get something out of this?" The janitor's calm gaze did not waver. "I am not hiding anything to gain recognition, sir. My life is not built on recognition. I do what I must to survive and to care for my child. That is enough." The captain's jaw tightened. He had been trained to challenge everything, to question every claim, but this calm, unshakable man in front of him made his usual methods feel useless. "You must have allies somewhere," he said. "Someone who can vouch for you." The janitor shook his head slowly. "I have worked alone. I do not seek allies. I only do what is necessary and right." The captain sat back in his chair, frustration evident. He rubbed his face with one hand, then looked back at the janitor. "You've made this very difficult for me. You could have made this easy. You could have come forward, explained your past. Instead, you wait, hoping your silence will protect you." "I have never hidden my past, sir," the janitor replied gently. "I simply live in the present." The tension was interrupted by the soft buzz of a phone on the desk. The captain picked it up, speaking quickly into it. The janitor heard only fragments. "Yes. Old records. Clearance confirmed. But nothing recent. We need verification. Can someone hire check?" He stayed quiet, letting the conversation flow around him. He had seen enough bureaucracy in his life to know that noise often took time, but truth always had a way of surfacing eventually. After a few minutes, the captain hung up. His face was tight with frustration, but there was also a flicker of uncertainty, something he rarely allowed himself to feel. "See, even the records department is confused. Nothing recent. Nothing current. How do you explain that?" The janitor thought for a moment. "Some clearances were granted years ago. When I left service, it was understood that they remained valid for certain responsibilities. It was not unusual, sir. The captain's eyebrows rose. Not unusual? Then why is no one talking about it? Why is it all hidden in some old file? Because, sir, some matters are not meant for widespread discussion, the janitor said softly. Some choices are made to protect people, to protect families, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The captain's eyes narrowed. So you've been keeping secrets. You've been lying in silence all this time. The janitor shook his head slowly. Not lying. Choosing discretion is not lying. It is responsibility. The captain let out a sharp laugh, not amused. Responsibility? You call this responsibility? You've risked everything just by showing up here. By claiming authority, you have no one to answer to in this building. I answer to what is right, the janitor said, and to those who entrusted me. That is enough. The captain leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. He had expected someone to crack under questioning, to stumble, to beg, or justify themselves. He had expected confrontation, weakness, fear. Instead, he found calmness, confidence, and honesty. It was unsettling, like looking at something you could not fully understand. Outside the door, whispers grew louder. Officers were talking among themselves, trying to piece together what they had seen. Some had doubts about the captain's judgment, others about the janitor. The janitor had learned long ago that it did not matter what people thought of him in that moment. What mattered was truth, action, and the quiet work that came after recognition faded. The captain pushed the papers aside and rubbed his temple. You think your silence gives you power, don't you? I do not think of it as power, the janitor replied. I think of it as responsibility. Choices have consequences. Words do not always change reality. The captain leaned forward again. Then tell me the truth. Who approved your clearance? Who vouched for you? The janitor met his gaze steadily. People who are no longer here, sir. People who trusted me and knew what I could handle. That trust remains valid, even if they are not here to speak for me. The captain stared at him, speechless for a moment. The words made sense, yet they were hard to accept. In a world built on hierarchy and rank, trust that existed outside the chain of command was almost unthinkable. You make it difficult to do my job, the captain finally said. I am supposed to enforce rules, yet I cannot even question you effectively. You leave me with nothing to hold on to but suspicion. I do not wish to make your job difficult, sir, the janitor said quietly. I only wish to do what is right. That is my responsibility. Yours is yours. The captain's fists tightened on the desk. Responsibility, right. That is easy to say when no one doubts you. But here, now you are doubted. People question everything about you. And yet you stand there calm, as if the world owes you nothing. The janitor nodded. Because it does not. The world owes no one recognition. It only asks that we act with honesty and care. That is what matters. The captain was silent for a moment. He had faced many people in his life, soldiers, civilians, officers, even adversaries. Few had met him with such calm, unwavering integrity. It was both admirable and infuriating. Suddenly, the soft hum of the office was broken by a knock on the door. A young officer peeked in, holding a tablet. Sir? Verification has been sent from command. It's old, yes, but everything matches. All signatures, all approvals. Clearance confirmed. The captain's eyes darted to the janitor, then back at the tablet. I don't understand, he said, his voice quieter than before. You will, the janitor said simply. The officer nodded and stepped back, leaving the room. Outside, footsteps continued to echo down the hall. The whispers were louder now. People were beginning to understand that the quiet man standing in front of them was not what they thought he was. The captain's face was tight with frustration. All this time, all the years, you've been working here quietly, unnoticed. And no one questioned you? Not unnoticed, sir, the janitor said softly. Observed, always observed, but also trusted. The captain shook his head, unable to comprehend it fully. Trust in someone so ordinary-looking in a janitor? How? Because trust is not about appearances, the janitor said. It is about actions, decisions, and integrity. Something you see in every step, every choice someone makes. Not in the uniform they wear. The captain leaned back, breathing heavily. He was used to giving orders, to being in control, to seeing things in black and white. Here, everything was gray, and that was uncomfortable. The janitor's gaze softened slightly. Sir, I do not seek approval. I do not need it. I only do what is right and what is necessary. That is enough for me. It may not be enough for you, but it is enough for those who need me most. The captain stared at him, trying to measure every word, every pause, every inflection. He was beginning to realize that this man's life was not simple. That quiet exterior hid years of experience, sacrifice, and courage that few could understand. The janitor's mind, meanwhile, was already moving beyond this moment. He thought of his child waiting at home, of breakfast, of the small routines that made life meaningful. He had faced danger before. He had faced accusations before, and he had always come through. This was no different. He simply needed patience, calm, and truth. Outside, the whispers continued. Officers began sharing what they knew, trying to piece together the story of a man who seemed ordinary, but was anything but. And inside the small office, the janitor stood quietly, calm, collected, unwavering. He knew that this confrontation was only one step. Challenges would continue, questions would persist, and the world would not easily accept what it could not fully understand. But he had survived before. He had endured suspicion and doubt before, and he would endure this as well. The captain finally spoke again, voice tight with frustration and reluctant acknowledgement. You've made this very difficult. But I suppose the records speak for themselves. They do, sir, the janitor said softly. And truth, eventually, always speaks for itself. A long silence followed. Outside the door, footsteps moved down the hall. Inside, the office felt heavy, but quiet. The confrontation had reached its peak, but the resolution had not yet come. The janitor remained still, knowing that patience, as always, would carry him forward. And somewhere down the hall, a new presence approached, someone whose arrival would change everything once again. The janitor stood quietly, his hands resting on the mop cart, as the tension in the room thickened. The captain rubbed his forehead, silent for a moment, caught between disbelief and the sudden realization that perhaps he had underestimated the man in front of him. The silence was broken by the soft but decisive sound of footsteps approaching from the hall. They were heavier, confident, and carried an air of authority that made even the captain straighten in his chair. The door opened, and a tall woman in uniform stepped into the office. Her presence commanded attention without a word. She was a Navy Admiral, her rank insignia shining against the crisp fabric of her uniform. The room felt smaller somehow, as though the air had shifted, heavier and charged with anticipation. She looked around, scanning the room, her eyes sharp, calculating, and finally resting on the janitor. "Is this the man?" she asked, her voice steady but calm, carrying authority that did not need to be raised. The captain's mouth opened, then closed. "Yes, ma'am, I wasn't aware." The Admiral's gaze did not move from the janitor. "I am aware," she said simply, "and I can confirm he is exactly who he says he is." The janitor straightened slightly, his expression neutral. He did not smile. He did not relax, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes, as though he had expected this moment to come eventually. The captain's eyes widened. I don't understand. He is a janitor. I checked records. I verified clearance. But the way he presented himself, his demeanor, it seemed impossible. The Admiral stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. Rank and title do not always reflect the sacrifices a person has made. He served in situations that required trust, discretion, and courage beyond measure. He chose to leave active duty quietly, to protect his family, and to live a life away from attention. His choice does not make him less valuable. It makes him remarkable. The janitor remained silent. He had never sought recognition for his actions, and the Admiral did not need him to speak. She understood. That alone mattered. The captain leaned forward. But the clearance, the files. I followed every procedure, yet nothing explained him. How can someone work in a classified environment, unnoticed, for years, without anyone challenging it? The Admiral looked at him steadily. Because he was trusted by the right people. People who understood what he could handle. People who knew his integrity would never falter, regardless of visibility or recognition. Trust is earned, not demanded. He earned it long before any of us arrived here. The captain's face went pale. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down. He had spent hours doubting, questioning, trying to expose what he thought was deception, only to find that truth had quietly existed in front of him all along. The Admiral turned to the janitor. You did not seek recognition. You did not demand it. You served when needed, and then you returned to your life quietly, caring for your family. That is more courage than many ever show. The janitor's eyes flicked to the floor briefly, then back to hers. He nodded once, faintly, acknowledging the understanding without needing to say more. Words had never been necessary between them. Actions had spoken, as they always did. The captain struggled to find words. I can't believe this. I doubted you. I called security. I questioned your motives. And I was wrong. The Admiral's eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. You were only doing your duty. But you see now that integrity does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walks quietly, unnoticed, until the right eyes recognize it. You have witnessed that today. The janitor's expression remained calm, but a small sense of relief settled over him. The confrontation had escalated beyond his control, yet it had reached a point of truth. Recognition was not the goal, but respect quiet. Earned respect was now undeniable. The captain shook his head slowly, still trying to process the information. So, everything I doubted, every accusation I made, it was all unfounded? Correct, the Admiral said. And it is a lesson in humility and observation. Never underestimate someone based on appearance alone. Integrity often wears the most ordinary face. The janitor's mind drifted briefly to his child, waiting at home, completely unaware of the morning's events. A small smile appeared on his face, fleeting but genuine. He had chosen a life away from recognition, yet even in quiet, truth finds a way to shine. The captain's hands trembled slightly as he leaned back in his chair. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, the Admiral replied calmly. Actions speak louder than words. He has already spoken through his service and his choices. That is enough. The janitor nodded subtly, understanding that the moment had passed beyond argument or defense. The truth was now clear. The whispers outside the office would continue, curiosity and speculation buzzing through the hallways, but they no longer mattered. The facts were known to those who needed to know them. The Admiral glanced at the captain once more. Let this be a reminder. Rank does not always equal experience. Title does not always equal courage. And visibility does not always equal contribution. Judge actions, not appearances. The captain's shoulders slumped. He had thought himself in control, confident in his judgment. Now he felt small, not from threat, but from the weight of reality he had failed to see. The janitor remained still, a figure of quiet dignity in the room. His life had been about care, responsibility, and patience. Recognition had never been necessary. Respect, when it came, was quiet, earned, and lasting. The Admiral turned slightly, addressing the room beyond, just the captain. Let everyone here understand that courage comes in many forms. Not all of it is loud or visible. Some of it is quiet, steadfast, and enduring. And sometimes it stands in front of you, looking ordinary while carrying a lifetime of extraordinary choices. The captain finally nodded, slowly, accepting both his error and the lesson he had learned. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. The janitor looked down at the floor for a moment, thinking of his routine tasks, of the mop cart waiting, of the floors that needed cleaning. The confrontation had been intense, but work remained. Life remained. His priorities had never changed, and they would not now. The Admiral gave him a brief nod, acknowledgment without ceremony. "You may continue your duties. Know that your service, past and present, is respected." The janitor inclined his head in quiet gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am," he said simply. The captain cleared his throat, still processing, still humbled. "Sir?" "Ma'am, I see now. I apologize for the assumptions, the accusations. You acted on what you knew," the Admiral said. "Learn from it and move forward." The janitor wheeled his cart quietly out of the office, leaving the captain and Admiral behind. The hallway seemed different now, not because it had changed, but because perception had. People who had doubted him would now think twice before judging based solely on appearances. Some curiosity and whispers would remain, but the weight of truth had shifted the balance dot as he moved through the corridor. He felt the familiar rhythm of routine returning. The lights, the echo of his boots, the hum of activity, it was all ordinary, yet extraordinary in its own quiet way. He had faced doubt, suspicion, and even outright accusation. Yet he had remained steadfast, patient, and truthful. That had been enough. His thoughts drifted again to home, to the small breakfast waiting for his child, to the notes tucked in lunchboxes, to the ordinary life he had chosen deliberately. Recognition had never been the goal, but the quiet respect that came now was a subtle reassurance that his choices had been sound. The janitor rounded a corner and saw officers quietly observing him, some with newfound respect, others still processing. He did not look back. He did not need to. His work continued, and his life continued, as it always had. The captain watched him leave, humbled and silent. The lessons of the morning were sinking in slowly, replacing doubt with understanding. He had underestimated the quiet man who carried courage in silence, discipline in action, and integrity in every step. The Admiral turned to the captain one last time. "Remember this day," she said. "Not because of rank, not because of file numbers, not because of protocol. Remember it because of courage, honesty, and the quiet choices that define character." The captain nodded. There were no words strong enough to fully capture the lesson, but he felt it deep in the core of his being. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his work, pushing the cart gently down the halls, cleaning, observing, and maintaining the quiet life he had fought to protect. Recognition would come and go, whispers would rise and fade, but integrity, patience, and responsibility, those things remained. They had always been enough, and somewhere, beyond the doors of the office, life in the building carried on. Orders were given, routines followed, and plans made. But the lesson of the quiet janitor, who had faced doubt with calm and truth, lingered like a subtle echo. Some lessons are not shouted. Some are lived. And some, like this one, change the way people see the world without a single word of fanfare. For the janitor, the day was not about triumph or recognition. It was about duty, patience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done right. And that, for him, was always enough. The janitor walked down the hallways, the morning light beginning to filter in through the high windows. The building had returned to its usual rhythm. Officers moved purposefully, voices carried with businesslike energy, and the hum of machines and computers filled the spaces between. Everything seemed ordinary, yet nothing felt the same to those who had witnessed the confrontation earlier. He moved quietly, carefully maneuvering his mop cart around corners, cleaning as he always had. Every step was measured, deliberate, a reflection of a life built on discipline and patience. Yet behind that ordinary motion, there was a quiet pride. He had faced doubt, accusations, and disbelief, and he had emerged without needing to prove himself in words. His truth had spoken on its own. The whispers in the hall had already started. Officers and staff who had observed him earlier shared quiet comments, half questions, half admiration. "I never realized. So that's who he really is. Unbelievable." Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded with newfound respect. The janitor ignored the whispers. He had never sought approval, and he never would. Recognition had never been the goal. His focus had always been on responsibility, integrity, and the quiet work that needed to be done. He reached a corner where a few younger officers had paused, talking among themselves. Their voices dropped when they saw him, but curiosity lingered in their eyes. One of them spoke softly, almost to himself. "I thought he was just a janitor. Now I see. He's more than that." The janitor offered a faint nod, but did not stop. A small acknowledgement was enough. Words were rarely necessary. His life had always been about action rather than explanation. As he rounded the next hallway, he passed the captain, still seated at his desk. The man looked up, and for the first time that day, there was a humility in his gaze. He did not speak immediately, as if the weight of his earlier assumptions pressed down on him. Finally, he cleared his throat. I want to apologize," the captain said quietly. His voice was low, respectful. "I doubted you. I questioned you unfairly. I let assumptions guide my actions instead of facts." The janitor paused for a moment, hands resting lightly on the mop handle. He looked at the captain, calm and composed. There was no anger, no resentment. He had faced this before, and confrontation had never been his enemy. "Sir," he said softly, "your duty is to question. Your role is to challenge. You did what you thought was right, but now you see the truth. That is enough." The captain swallowed, nodding slowly. Yes, it is enough. And I will remember it. I'll remember that appearances can be deceiving, that integrity is quiet, and that patience is powerful." The janitor nodded once, faintly, and continued walking. The floors were waiting, and so was the routine he had built. His life had always been about small responsibilities, quiet victories, and care for the people who depended on him most. Recognition could wait. His priorities never changed. As he pushed the cart down the hallway, the Admiral's words echoed in his mind. "Trust is earned, not demanded. Courage is not always loud. Integrity often wears the most ordinary face." Those words were not just for the captain or the officers. They were for anyone who had witnessed the events, anyone who had underestimated, doubted, or questioned without understanding. The janitor reached a section of the building where he often paused to rest, near a large window that overlooked the quiet courtyard. He set the mop down, taking a moment to watch the sunlight play on the paving stones, the shadows of trees stretching across the ground. The courtyard was empty, peaceful, and ordinary, just like the life he had chosen for himself. He allowed himself a small, private smile. In the office, the captain had begun to speak with his staff quietly, explaining what had happened. The officers exchanged stories of the janitor's past service, of the trust and responsibility he had carried silently for years. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others simply nodded, understanding that respect was long overdue. The whispers spread, slowly, throughout the building, carrying a lesson that could not be ignored. Do not underestimate the quiet, the ordinary, or the unseen. The janitor returned to his work, cleaning the floors, moving steadily from room to room. Each sweep of the mop was precise, methodical, and almost meditative. It was a rhythm he had always relied on, a way to center himself amidst chaos or confrontation. Today, it felt different, not because the work had changed, but because the perception around him had. People now saw him differently, even if he himself remained unchanged. During a brief break, he sat down in a quiet corner, allowing himself a moment to think. He thought of his child waiting at home, of breakfast, of the small joys that made his life meaningful. That had always been the focus. Duty, yes, but also love, care, and simple routines that grounded him. The recognition, the confrontation, the Admiral's acknowledgement, it was meaningful. Yes, but it was not necessary for him to continue living rightly as the day progressed. The janitor moved through the building with quiet authority, unseen but fully present. Officers who had doubted him now gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. Others whispered quietly, sharing stories of courage and integrity. The captain occasionally glanced up from his work, still processing the lessons he had learned that morning. Humility had arrived late, but it was arriving. The janitor thought about the choices that had brought him here. Every decision to leave the spotlight, to protect his family, to act quietly and honestly, had led to this moment. He did not regret any of it. Life had been hard, demanding, and often lonely, but it had also been full of purpose. He had acted rightly, cared deeply, and protected what mattered most. That was the measure of success in his eyes. Later in the day, he pushed his cart past the captain once more. Their eyes met briefly, and this time there was no tension, only mutual acknowledgement. The captain nodded, quietly, sincerely. It was not a public gesture, not a show for anyone else. It was simply an understanding that had been earned, a respect that had grown from truth, patience, and action. The janitor continued his rounds, cleaning offices, hallways, and floors with the same quiet diligence he had always displayed. Officers and staff began to leave for the day, some casting glances toward him, a mixture of curiosity and admiration in their eyes. They had witnessed something remarkable, even if it was subtle and unspoken. They had seen courage, patience, and integrity walk quietly among them. As the sun began to dip lower, the janitor finished his work and pushed his cart toward the exit. The day had been long, but his tasks were complete. He paused for a moment at the doorway, looking back over the halls he had walked so many times. There was a sense of satisfaction in the air, not loud or dramatic, but steady, enduring, and quiet. Outside, the world waited. His child was home, homework to help with, dinner to prepare, and bedtime stories to tell. The ordinary life he had fought to protect was ready for him, as it always had been. Recognition had come in its own way, but the quiet satisfaction of duty, love, and responsibility remained the true reward. The captain watched him leave, still seated at his desk. There was no applause, no ceremony, only the acknowledgement that a lesson had been learned. Sometimes the most extraordinary acts occur in the quietest ways. Sometimes the people who make the biggest difference are those who demand nothing in return. The Admiral's presence lingered in the minds of everyone who had been there that morning. She had reminded them that rank and visibility were not the only measures of courage or integrity, and the janitor had lived that lesson every day, silently, steadily, without need for applause or acknowledgement. As the janitor walked out of the building, he carried nothing but his mop cart and a lifetime of experience, discipline, and care. The world outside was ordinary, full of sunlight and small sounds, the distant laughter of children, cars passing by, birds calling. It was ordinary, yes, but it was home, and it was enough. He thought of the moments that truly mattered, the small victories at home, the quiet lessons he imparted, the life he had built deliberately and carefully. Recognition from others was fleeting. Truth and integrity endured. The events of the day had changed perception, but they had not changed him. The janitor reached the street and took a deep breath of fresh air. The confrontation, the doubts, the lessons, they were behind him now. What mattered most was what lay ahead, a life of care, responsibility, and quiet courage, shared with the person who mattered most to him. And so he continued, step by step, carrying the weight of his choices lightly, moving forward with calm determination. The building behind him, the captain, the admiral, the officers, they would remember the lessons they had learned that day, whether openly or quietly. But for him, the work never ended. It was a life of service, not for accolades, but for duty, integrity, and love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he walked on, leaving behind the echoes of confrontation, and moving toward the ordinary, extraordinary life he had chosen. Quietly, steadfastly, and with the unspoken understanding that true respect and recognition are earned in actions, not words, and that was more than enough.